I tried calling her again today. The line rang once, twice, and then went straight to voicemail. My stomach sank like a stone dropped into cold water. I knew she wouldn't answer. Her last words still echoed in my mind, sharp and unyielding. Don't call me again. I had no idea why. No argument, no warning, just that sentence and silence. Silence that stretched across the empty walls of my house and into the quiet corners of my life. I sat down heavily in the chair by the kitchen window. The morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting the room into uneven stripes. I am 72, living alone since Martha passed, and the loneliness is something I've gotten used to. But not this. Not being shut out by my own daughter. My hands trembled slightly as I held the phone. I had to know why she hated my presence enough to silence me completely. The calls went unanswered. I left messages. I tried her cell, her work line, even the number of a neighbor she used to visit. Nothing. Each unanswered ring felt like a small blade, cutting into the hope that she might come around. I kept thinking of that voice, the one I raised, the one I loved so fiercely. Why would she say such words? Why would she push me away? My chest ached with confusion and sorrow. The house felt too quiet, too empty, as if it were holding its breath with me. It was the mailbox that first startled me. A thick envelope, unfamiliar, resting against the small wooden tray at the bottom. My name was written clearly on the front, in neat, professional handwriting. I frowned. I didn't recognize the return address. Carefully, I tore it open. Inside was a letter from someone named Julia, a reporter. She claimed to work with my daughter. The ink was dark, the sentences precise. There was concern, genuine concern, woven between the lines. She mentioned my daughter's behavior, the way she had withdrawn from me, and hinted at trouble, something serious happening that my daughter couldn't speak about herself. The words were measured, but their weight pressed down on me, heavier than the morning sun outside. I read the letter twice. Each time, the dread inside me grew. There were warnings, subtle but clear. Julia seemed to know things I could only guess at. She described unusual absences, unexplained stress, and a hint that my daughter might be under pressure from someone else. Someone who wanted her to act against me, to push me out of her life without explanation. My hands shook as I folded the letter, pressing it to my chest. My heart raced, not with hope, but with fear. Fear for my daughter, and fear for myself. I looked around the house, each room echoing my unease. The furniture, the pictures of family moments, the empty chairs, they all felt like witnesses to my helplessness. I realized that I had no control here, no way to reach her directly, no way to understand the storm she was caught in. Yet, beneath the shock and sorrow, a quiet determination began to take root. I needed to understand. I needed answers. I had to know what had driven her to silence me, and who, or what, was forcing her hand. I reread Julia's letter once more, this time paying attention to every nuance, every carefully chosen word. It felt like a lifeline thrown across a chasm I hadn't even known existed. I didn't know if my daughter would forgive me for reading it. I didn't care right now. What mattered was knowing. What mattered was taking the first step to uncover the truth. And so, with the envelope still trembling in my hand, I made a decision. I would follow this trail, however painful or frightening it might be. I owed her, and I owed myself, that much. The quiet of the house pressed in on me again. I set the letter down on the counter, staring at it like a puzzle I needed to solve. Questions swirled in my mind, gnawing at me. What had happened to her? Who was she protecting? And why had she shut me out so completely? Each unanswered question tightened a knot in my chest. But amid the confusion and the fear, one thing was clear: I would not remain silent. I would not let this stand. The answers were out there, and I was determined to find them. Would you try to reach out again, or wait for answers? I asked myself that, over and over, and I realized there was only one way forward. I could not stand idly by. I had to act, even if every step brought more pain. And so I took a deep breath, clutched the envelope once more, and prepared myself for what I had to do next. The path ahead was uncertain, frightening, but it was the only path that might lead me back to her. The second letter arrived 2 days later, slipped under the door in the same precise handwriting. I recognized Julia's name immediately. I hesitated before picking it up, my fingers stiff with a mix of hope and dread. Inside, her words were careful, formal, but underneath them ran a current of genuine concern. She began by addressing my daughter's unusual behavior, describing moments that had unsettled her at work, changes in demeanor, withdrawn conversation, and a noticeable tension that hadn't been there before. I could feel my stomach tighten with unease as I read. Julia clearly knew my daughter in a professional context, yet her words made it evident she had also seen the personal strain affecting her. She detailed the subtle signs she had noticed over the past months. Secrecy where there had once been openness, irritability that seemed to bubble up for no apparent reason, and small, fearful gestures that spoke louder than any word. Julia mentioned that my daughter had begun avoiding calls from me months ago, carefully sidestepping family gatherings and using work as an excuse for her absence. Each sentence painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. A daughter I thought I knew, entangled in something beyond my understanding, keeping me deliberately out of her life. The weight of it pressed heavily on me. I wanted to call her, to ask, to demand answers, but Julia's careful phrasing implied I might not yet be able to reach her safely. Julia suggested that my daughter might be under pressure, whether from her workplace, an overbearing supervisor, or even someone in her personal life. The implication was subtle but clear. Someone was influencing her actions, forcing her into silence. The thought gnawed at me. Who could compel her to block me, to push me away, to leave me in the dark? It was one thing for a child to grow distant naturally, but this was deliberate, orchestrated, and fraught with danger. I felt a mixture of fear and moral outrage. Fear for my daughter, outrage at whoever had imposed this on her. I tried to reply immediately, drafting a careful letter in return. My handwriting shook as I explained who I was, my concern, and my desire to understand. I asked Julia directly whether she could give me guidance on how to reach my daughter safely. Days passed. No response came. The silence felt heavier than any word. Each moment without contact left me grasping at fragments of understanding, trying to piece together a situation that had suddenly grown so complex and threatening. I felt both gratitude toward Julia for noticing and despair that her protective words might be all I would have for now. Reading and rereading her letter, I felt a mixture of unease and cautious hope. The protective role Julia assumed gave me a small sense of reassurance. Someone outside my family cared enough to notice, to warn me. Yet the unease lingered. My daughter was still unreachable, and whatever was controlling her actions remained invisible to me. I could not shake the suspicion that things were being hidden intentionally, and that each day of silence risked widening the gap between us even further. Would I trust a stranger trying to warn me about my own child? I found myself answering yes, despite the fear. Her words were grounded, careful, and full of concern. For the first time in weeks, I felt that I was not entirely alone in navigating this shadow that had fallen over my family. Yet the question lingered. How long would her protection be enough? And how much longer before I could reach my daughter directly to understand what had happened? I kept going over the last few weeks in my mind, trying to pinpoint when things had begun to change. It started subtly, small withdrawals that at first seemed normal for a busy adult. She was quiet on the phone, distracted when we spoke, and her eyes would dart away whenever I tried to connect. I noticed her tension, the way her shoulders stiffened, the faint frown that never quite left her face. She avoided eye contact, even in video calls. At the time, I told myself it was stress from work, that she had deadlines and responsibilities. But now, looking back, I could see it was something more, something deliberate. Then the small, creeping signs of control became harder to ignore. A bank notification popped up unexpectedly, an alert about a change in an account we had managed together. I froze. The paperwork bore her name in a way I hadn't authorized. My pulse quickened as I realized she might have signed or submitted documents without my knowledge. I felt helpless, unsure whether it was a simple mistake or something more troubling. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Each new piece of evidence was a small shock, but together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. It was at that moment that Julia's second letter arrived. Her handwriting seemed urgent, more insistent than before. She wrote directly about my daughter's unusual behavior, the way she seemed fearful, constrained, and under pressure that she could not name. Julia's words hinted that someone might be manipulating her, steering her actions, and keeping her away from me deliberately. Reading it, I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that someone had noticed, terror at the thought that my daughter was being controlled by forces beyond her own power. Her tone was careful, yet unmistakably warning me of danger. I traced each memory with a renewed intensity, recounting evenings when my daughter had canceled visits at the last minute, when she seemed anxious over phone conversations or avoided mentioning who she had been speaking to or meeting with. Patterns emerged. Phone calls I never received, emails she never forwarded, conversations left unfinished. A cloud of unease settled over me. I wanted to call her again, to demand answers, but I feared provoking the wrong reaction. Fearful for her safety, I held back, instead noting every clue, every anomaly, and every change I could observe. The weight of inaction pressed down on me, but beneath it, a quiet determination began to form. I had to understand what had happened before it was too late. Each unanswered call, each suspicious document, each silent moment became evidence, not just of distance, but of something deliberate and potentially harmful. I could not simply wait. The letters from Julia had given me both warning and guidance. Watch, observe, document. I had no proof yet, no certainty, but the pieces were aligning in a pattern I could not ignore. What would I investigate first if I were in my place? The thought haunted me as I stared at the growing stack of letters, notifications, and unexplained changes. Each detail demanded attention, each clue demanded action. I realized that silence itself had become evidence. My daughter's absence, her evasions, the documents, all of it pointed to a story being written without my knowledge. I knew I could not remain passive. I would have to gather the fragments, follow the trail, and confront the reality before me, however painful or frightening it might prove to be. The next letter from Julia arrived quietly, sliding under my door like the one before it. But this time, the weight in my hands was heavier. I recognized the envelope immediately and braced myself. I knew this letter would carry more than words. It would carry truths I might not be ready to face. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unfolding the paper carefully, as though the letter itself might shatter if handled too roughly. Julia wrote with a grave, measured tone. She described my daughter's work environment in detail, revealing pressures I could hardly imagine. The newsroom was not the bustling, lively place I had pictured from her stories and calls. Instead, it was tense, toxic, with an unspoken expectation to protect secrets that were not hers to keep. Julia explained that my daughter had been placed in situations where she was coerced into covering up mistakes and wrongdoing by supervisors and editors who wielded their authority with cold calculation. Each line I read cut deeper, leaving a knot in my chest that seemed to tighten with every word. And then came the mention of financial missteps that struck close to home. Julia carefully explained that my daughter had been caught between her loyalty and obligation to her employers and the legal consequences of signing forms and documents she may not have fully authorized. Some of these documents involved my accounts, changes that appeared suspicious and out of place. My heart sank. I felt shock and disbelief, unable to comprehend how my daughter could be put in such a position, manipulated to act against her own father. Yet, Julia insisted that her information was accurate, verified as much as possible, and that she regretted needing to involve me, but I had a right to know the truth. Grief washed over me first, a deep and heavy sorrow that threatened to pull me under. My daughter, the child I had nurtured, was trapped in a world I could barely understand. Shock followed quickly, sharper than the grief, as the magnitude of her entanglement became clear. Someone had used her position, her trust, and her sense of duty against her, forcing her into choices that betrayed not her heart, but her freedom. The moral outrage I felt was immediate, directed both at the people who manipulated her and at the situation itself, which had placed us all in this web of secrecy and fear. I reread the letter, absorbing every line, every carefully chosen word. Julia's concern was palpable. She apologized for the discomfort her revelations might cause, but she emphasized that the truth could not be hidden from me any longer. The urgency in her tone made it clear that time was critical. The documents, the forged signatures, the coerced actions, they all painted a picture I could no longer ignore. My grief was now paired with determination. I had to act, to protect her, and understand the full scope of what had occurred. I set the letter down and looked around my quiet house, feeling the weight of the betrayal and the burden of responsibility. My daughter was caught in circumstances beyond her control, and I was left in the shadows, trying to piece together the fragments of a truth she could not yet voice herself. Should I confront her directly, risking further strain, or continue to gather evidence, ensuring I understood the full picture first. The question weighed heavily, a moral dilemma layered with fear and sorrow. One thing was certain, I could not stand still. I had to find the path forward, no matter how painful it might be. The first sign that things had escalated beyond words came when I received a notice from the bank. My hands shook as I read the statement. An account change I had not authorized, an address update I never requested. At first, I thought it must be a clerical error, something minor that could be corrected quickly. But the more I examined it, the more impossible it seemed. My daughter's name appeared on documents, signatures that were suspiciously precise. My chest tightened with fear. This was no small mistake. Someone had taken steps to manipulate our accounts, to alter records that belonged to me. Then Julia's next letter arrived, thick with photocopied forms and documentation. She had painstakingly included copies of statements, signed forms, and notices, each one showing my daughter's signature, or what appeared to be her signature, on changes she may not have made willingly. I stared at them in disbelief. The handwriting looked like hers, yet the circumstances were impossible. It was clear she had been coerced, pressured into signing for actions that affected both her and me. I felt a surge of moral outrage, a mix of fury and helplessness at the situation imposed upon her and our family. I tried to recall the moments when she had seemed anxious or distracted, the late nights spent at the office, the hurried phone calls that ended abruptly. Each memory now carried a new weight. Her panic, her hesitation, the way she avoided direct conversations with me. It all pointed to someone else exerting control over her, forcing her into a position she could not navigate alone. My heart ached, thinking of her trapped, unable to speak freely, burdened by responsibilities that were not hers to bear. As I reviewed the documents again, the pattern became undeniable. This was more than pressure at work. There were financial manipulations, legal obligations shifted, signatures forged, an organized scheme that I could no longer ignore. My protective instincts surged. I could not allow this to continue. I had to act, to shield her from those who had manipulated her, and to safeguard what remained of my accounts and legal rights. The responsibility was heavy, but I could not step back. After hours of reviewing forms and letters, I made a decision. I would seek legal counsel, someone who could navigate the system and offer guidance on how to protect both my daughter and myself. The weight of fear remained, but it was joined by a steely determination. I would not allow corruption, coercion, or fraud to destroy what little stability I had left. The path ahead would be complex, likely painful, but the alternative, inaction, was far worse. Could not let silence or manipulation dictate the course of our lives. Would you go straight to the police at this point, or wait to gather more proof? I asked myself, feeling the tension of the decision pressing on every part of me. I knew action was inevitable, and yet caution was necessary. Each form, each forged signature, each trace of manipulation was a warning. The danger was real, and time was critical. I folded the papers carefully, setting them aside, and resolved that I would move forward, guided by both justice and protection, even if it meant confronting truths that my daughter could not yet voice herself. I scheduled a meeting with a local elder protection specialist, someone Julia had recommended. Walking into the office, I felt the familiar tension of entering unfamiliar territory. Yet, there was a strange comfort in knowing I was not alone anymore. I laid out the documents, the letters, and the copies of forms Julia had sent. The specialist listened carefully, taking notes and asking measured questions, their tone serious but calm. For the first time in weeks, I felt that my concerns were being understood, that the gravity of the situation was being recognized beyond the walls of my quiet home. Julia had sent additional documentation directly to the office, a sworn statement detailing what she had observed in my daughter's behavior, her interactions at work, and the coercion she believed was occurring. The papers confirmed many of the fears I had been harboring, but having them in a formal context made the danger undeniable. My daughter was caught in circumstances I could not control, and yet I now had allies who could help me navigate a path forward. Each page I handed over felt heavier than the last, filled with the tension of unspoken truths and the weight of responsibility. The elder protection specialist nodded gravely as they reviewed everything. "There is clear cause for concern," they said. "Your daughter may be experiencing financial and emotional coercion, and we have an obligation to investigate. Hearing it confirmed what I had suspected, but also brought a pang of guilt. It was validation, yes, but it was not comforting. The thought of authorities intervening in my daughter's life, of her being scrutinized or questioned, filled me with lingering fear. I wanted to protect her from harm, but I also had to confront the reality that inaction was no longer an option. Soon after, I learned that the investigation extended to her employer. The newsroom she had once described as vibrant and exciting was now under scrutiny. Emails, schedules, and protocols were being reviewed. My daughter, who had already become silent toward me, retreated further, communicating with fewer people, avoiding any direct contact. Each day without her voice amplified my concern. I could see her trapped, caught between her obligations, the manipulation surrounding her, and her own loyalty to me. My grief for her helplessness grew, but so did my determination to act on her behalf. Sitting in my quiet home later that evening, I folded Julia's letters and the legal forms carefully. My thoughts circled endlessly. Was I betraying my daughter by involving these authorities? Or was this the only way to protect her? The moral weight pressed down on me. Yet, beneath the guilt and fear, there was cautious hope. Systems were in motion. People were watching, investigating, and documenting what had been hidden for too long. My role now was to support, to provide clarity, and to ensure that truth emerged without further damage to her or to myself. Even in this solemn moment, I knew the path ahead was fraught. I had taken a step toward justice, but the uncertainty lingered. Each unanswered call, each silent day, reminded me that protection sometimes requires confronting truths no parent wishes to face. And as I sat with the papers and letters before me, I resolved to stay vigilant. This was not betrayal. It was the difficult act of safeguarding the one I loved, even when love demanded hard choices. The message arrived late one evening, a single brief notification on my phone. My hands froze as I read the first line, heart hammering in my chest. It was from her, my daughter. After weeks of silence, after unanswered calls and letters that went unacknowledged, she had reached out, not with explanation, but with confession. I hesitated before opening it fully, fearing what I might find, knowing that whatever she had to say would carry both truth and pain. Her words unfolded carefully, each sentence trembling with fear and guilt. She admitted that she had signed documents she knew she shouldn't, that she had altered forms under direct threat from people who held power over her. The words made my stomach turn. She had been forced into actions that betrayed both herself and me. My grief was immediate, a deep, hollow ache at the thought of my child trapped in a situation beyond her control. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I knew I had to let her speak, to let her unburden herself first. She explained that she had blocked me not out of malice, but out of shame and fear. She feared my anger, my disappointment, and the consequences of revealing what had been done under duress. Her silence had been a shield, a desperate attempt to protect me from the chaos surrounding her, even though it only caused more pain. Reading her words, I felt sorrow and frustration collide. I understood her fear, yet I also understood the heartbreak that her absence had caused. She went on to clarify the true source of the coercion. It was her employer, a supervisor who wielded influence and intimidation, forcing her into compliance. They had manipulated her professional obligations to control her actions, knowing the emotional weight of responsibility she carried. The realization filled me with anger, not at my daughter, but at those who had exploited her, who had turned her into a reluctant participant in a betrayal neither of us wanted. I felt moral clarity sharpen inside me. The fault lay with those who coerced her, not the child I had raised with care and trust. As I reread the message, the complexity of the situation sank in. My daughter was both victim and participant, caught between loyalty, fear, and manipulation. My heartbreak was tempered by understanding. I knew now why she had been silent, why she had withdrawn, why she had seemed so distant and unreachable. It was a tragedy born of circumstance, not intention. Yet the consequences were real, and the damage had been done. I set the phone down, breathing heavily, feeling both sorrow and determination. What consequence feels fair for someone who was both victim and participant? I asked myself the question again and again, weighing anger against compassion, justice against protection. The moral path was tangled, and yet I understood that the only way forward was through measured action, through accountability tempered with recognition of coercion. My heart ached, but my resolve grew. I would protect her, I would seek justice, and I would ensure that the truth, finally revealed, would not be ignored. The investigation concluded with charges filed against the people who had manipulated my daughter, the ones who coerced her into actions that betrayed both their victims and the law. Relief came slowly, tempered by the knowledge of all that had been lost along the way. My daughter faced consequences too, but they were lighter, acknowledged by the court as mitigated by her coercion. It was a bittersweet clarity. Justice had been served, yet the pain of betrayal lingered like a shadow across my quiet house. Julia's letters continued to arrive, even after the proceedings concluded, each one carefully summarizing developments and providing updates I could not obtain elsewhere. Her words were measured, informative, and gentle, a reminder that someone outside our fractured family cared enough to ensure the truth was fully known. Reading them, I felt a strange combination of gratitude and melancholy. Gratitude for the guidance and clarity, melancholy for the months lost to fear, silence, and uncertainty. I sat in my living room, looking at the quiet spaces my daughter had once filled with laughter, argument, and conversation. I thought about betrayal, not only the deliberate acts of those who had forced her hand, but also the unintended wounds inflicted by the long weeks of separation. The letters, the forms, the silent calls, all of it marked time stolen from both of us. Aging carries a weight, a realization that each day gone is a day you cannot reclaim. I understood the cost of silence too late, yet I also understood the importance of holding firm to moral clarity, even when the heart is heavy. The question that troubled me most remained unresolved. Should I open the door cautiously to a second chance, or close it permanently to protect myself and preserve the lessons learned? Each choice carried risks. A reunion might invite old vulnerabilities, further manipulation, or disappointment. Permanent separation would ensure safety, but at the cost of enduring sorrow and lost potential for reconciliation. I weighed both, realizing that moral clarity sometimes requires difficult restraint, and that love alone does not guarantee safety or justice. I reflected on the lessons these months had taught me: vigilance, courage, and the delicate balance of protection and accountability. Justice had been administered, yet it did not heal the emotional fractures. I could see clearly the toll that betrayal and coercion take on a family, the fragile lines between victim and participant, and the endurance required to navigate a world where love and manipulation often collide. In the quiet that followed, I placed the letters back in their folder, letting the weight of their contents settle in my mind. The legal resolution brought closure in one sense, but the heart remained unsettled. Was justice enough, or would I close the door forever? I did not have an answer, only the knowledge that the question would remain, a testament to the complexity of trust, betrayal, and aging in the shadow of wrongdoing.